All right, we're recording. So, anything you want? Anything before we get started?
No, I think I'm ready to rock.
All right. All right, we've got our guest on the line today. You might remember him from back in the NBA DFS days. Broke down a couple slates with me, and he's back, Mr. Mike Polevchik. Give him a round of applause, everybody.
Hey, a round of applause.
Yeah.
I feel special now. Happy to be here. Happy to be back and talking about sports again.
Yeah.
We're getting closer, hopefully, to having football to talk about, and apparently baseball, which I know you hate. I think they're going to figure that out, and then NBA. So we're going to go from no sports to a ton of sports, like sports overload, which is fine with me. All at once, but I'm always most excited for football and fantasy football. It's just the lead up to the draft and the lead up to our season and all of us that whatever league you're in, to me is the most exciting sports part of the year.
You think they're actually going to bring baseball back? We're going to get to that point.
I think it seems like they're agreeing to something now. So
okay.
But we'll see. It'll be interesting. It might be more exciting if it's 60 games than 162, where the first like 60, 70 don't even matter. I think part of the problem with baseball is that not all the games seem to matter until like the All-Star break. So, but we're here to talk about football, not baseball. So I don't want to bore you and put you to sleep in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious to know, like, if they got, their shit together because they were really fucking it up. But I've been listening to some podcasts and so I was reading some things, and people seem to be thinking baseball could be putting themselves in like this weird like ice age, like this like extinction period almost, where they could almost never recover.
No, they're putting a lot of nails in their coffin, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And they're doing it themselves. It's just ego and greed and all the things, and not being flexible, not wanting to change, not wanting to make the product more exciting. As a lifelong baseball fan, it's hard for me to sit there and watch a full game anymore. Besides my beloved Cleveland Indians, but I don't just throw on a random game and sit there and watch baseball unless I'm with the boys and one of them wants to watch a game.
Yeah. Well, now I have hit my threshold on talking about baseball, so let's move
All
on.
right. I can't believe we made it like 3 minutes of baseball discussion on your podcast.
Anytime that we can talk about baseball possibly dying out or getting better, one or the other, I'm here for it because I would love to enjoy baseball again. So, yeah, let's move it right along. The big news, there's really only one thing to talk about news-wise, and that's Deebo Samuel broke his foot yesterday, or at least it came out yesterday, and that throws a wrench in a lot of people's plans, the 49ers plans, a lot of fantasy owners' plans, probably your plans, because you were going to probably have him on this breakouts list today. So what are your thoughts after reading that? I know you're upset about Deebo's injury.
Yeah, I really liked him, and I think one of the things as we're going to be talking about breakouts today, one of the things that I always look at isn't necessarily statistics or rankings, but the style of offense and how a player is utilized. And Deebo was perfect for that offense, just in what they do. He's a quick twitch guy, using him in multiple ways in that offense. My interest in fantasy football is always touches. How many touches a guy is getting, how many opportunities is a guy getting, and I saw nothing but endless possibilities with Deebo, and I really thought for him this would be a big year for him, and so it was upsetting when he not only to have an injury, but to have it be a foot injury. We've seen this with AJ Green and different people over the years, and
Hakeem Nicks back in the day.
Hakeem Nicks, good pull. I haven't thought of that in a while. Carolina, I think he was a Carolina guy. But those
Giants,
Carolina, North Carolina College.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
UNC,
I think Chapel Hill.
That's
guy.
true. Yeah, he was.
but that kind of injury, a foot injury, is the worst. And breaking that Jones fracture is not something that heals quickly. They can say 8 to 12 weeks all they want, but he's probably going to start on the pup and be out for the start of the season. And then even when he comes back, you have to take it easy with him because it's such an easy injury to re-aggravate. So, my hopes are dashed. He would have been definitely on my list of breakouts, top 4 or 5 for the upcoming season, just because of how he's being utilized in that offense and the creative ways they're getting him the ball, the explosive plays, big games. He definitely was a target of mine.
Yeah, I'm wondering who is going to sort of benefit from this, if anybody. I mean, if he is only out, 4 or 5 weeks and he does come back, strong and that foot just heals perfectly. I don't think, obviously the first few weeks, somebody will see more targets, but if he comes back in the best case scenario, I don't think it's really going to affect anyone. But let's say he's out for longer than we think, or he's just not as effective. I mean, thinking about who could potentially benefit from that, there's not a lot of other receivers on the team who like you're really confident in. I mean, who you turn into, Brandon Ayuk. Is that how you say it? Ayuk?
Ayukin.
Ayukin. I mean, will like Dante Pettis like emerge like out of nowhere? Obviously, probably going to be good for Kittle and getting catching a few more balls there.
I think Kittle is obviously like I know some of us aren't big on going high rounds or high dollar value in an auction draft for tight ends, but I think it certainly gives Kittle even more value. I think he gets more targets. And then I wasn't a big Ayuk fan. And they really don't have much else. So he's going to get the opportunity, but does he do something with it, or is he Laquan Treadwell? Is he just a bigger lumbering sort of guy that, I didn't really see much from him from the tape or leading up to the draft that I really loved. But the other name would be, I think it's Jalen Hurd. I think he was the Tennessee quarterback. I had to take a look, but they converted him to wide receiver. Or running back Tennessee. That he was hurt last year. So, maybe he gets an opportunity. Maybe they pick up a veteran. Obviously, there's going to be guys out there.
Kendrick Bourne.
I mean,
it's just another name in the hat.
He's just another name in the hat. I like Kendrick Bourne. Primarily a slot receiver, if I'm not mistaken. So, all those guys are going to get their opportunity. But the one thing we know with that offense is that they're going to run the hell out of the ball and throw it to Kittle. And so I don't think you can sit there and put a bunch of value on these unknown guys in the hopes that they're going to get all these targets, when I don't think San Francisco really needs to, throw it 25, 30 times a game. I don't think that's their MO or what they're going to do.
Yeah, they're probably just going to run the ball a hell of a lot more, and then,
Yeah, pretty
toss
much.
a few more passes to Kittle. So we'll see how this plays out. It's sad to see for Debo. Thought he was going to have a good year, but and who knows? Maybe he'll have a strong finish to the season. Maybe somebody who can pick up off the waivers, or certainly someone's probably going to draft him and stash him.
Great for dynasty. That'd be really good if you're doing a dynasty this year. Like starting up this year, I think it's a really good pick for that you can get later rounds and have a lot of value moving forward. But for just a redraft, I think you got to bump them back.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's move on to the topic of the day. Today, we're going to be doing our top 5 breakouts. This was tough for me, mostly, and we're going to define breakouts to us. It has a specific definition, but there might be a little wiggle room whether, who belongs, who doesn't. Like maybe, is a player, for instance, I was having a tough time like deciding who to throw in here. So I was like, can Joe Mixon be a breakout? I don't know. Like he's had really good seasons in the past. And if he's a top 5 running back this year, is that a breakout? So I was having some trouble there. So why don't you give us your definition, kind of the parameters that we're working with as far as breakouts go?
Yeah. So, and with breakouts, I think you have to make a distinction between breakouts and sleepers.
Yeah.
Sleepers like a late round flyer guy. Your 10th, 11th later. A rookie no one's talking about, a veteran who ends up, the slot wide receiver on a team with the main wide receiver hurt, and they blow up. That's to me that's a sleeper. A breakout is a guy can be in those mid rounds. Someone who hasn't quite popped yet, but you've just seen all the signs that, okay, this guy is lined up to be a top 10 guy, top 5 guy, top 15 guy, and make that move to the next tier. One of the examples I always use is Arian Foster in 2010, who had a monster preseason and just all the stars aligned. And, anybody who took Arian Foster in 2010 and then, the next few years had the number 1 running back in football. So, it's looking for those guys that are, your 4th, 5th, 6th round guys. And then also on the flip side of that would be somebody who, for one reason or another, is a higher round guy, but they kind of tend to slide back for some reason. Like people are afraid or fearful of certain things or don't like the offense they're in, who might have been injured or has an injury history, who's kind of, maybe a back end first round, second round guy who slides back end second or into the third or possibly fourth round for no reason really. When the stats and everything you see tells you that this person is a great player, and if there's no injury, if there's a better offense, if there's better opportunity, then there can be an elite top tier person. So I think those are the kind of 2 definitions of breakout, to me at least.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, you can sort of get lost in the mix and you start throwing out guys and you're like, wait, is this a sleeper? Has this person already broke out? You're kind of fighting between both ends of, is this person too far down and they're a sleeper, or this person is too good for me to have on a breakout list? And I actually do have more. One of my guys is more of a sleeper, but I kind of nudged him into this category. And are you ranking these? Do you have 5 to 1, or are these just five breakouts?
Kinda, because I've got like 20 guys that I've written down that I'm pulling from, and then I try to go through and my thought process was, if I were drafting today, how would I rank these guys?
All right.
And so I kind of went about it that way. So, I think sometimes people want to do the clickbait sort of thing with these breakouts and just throw out these off the wall names. And then if they were drafting, there's no way in hell they would draft the person. So, and so they could say they're right at the end of the year, which is something to be mindful of. I think, and one of the things I know we talked about last night briefly was process and like what you're doing leading into the season to determine these things. And one of the things I always recommend is do your own research. You guys used to always make fun of me for buying magazines in the internet age. One of the reasons I did that is so I could see all the offensive coordinators and those sort of changes, so to see what the scheme is going to be.
Yeah.
And, go through each team, read a little bit about them, look at what they did in the offensive line, look at what they're doing schematically, and then form your own opinions, and then listen to podcasts and all these great avenues that we have to supplement what you're thinking one way or the other, to change your opinion on something one way or the other. So it's not just your viewpoint, but have your base viewpoint before getting into all that research. I think that's a part of my process and something that I've done that served me well, because I think, everybody listens to podcasts now, and you're all getting the same opinions. I listened to 3 yesterday, and they just keep mentioning the same guys. Yeah. And so that draft value goes up and up and up, because everybody at this point, this isn't 6-7 years ago where nobody's listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And, about fantasy football. I mean, there's tons of them out there. I think this one is the best. That's just my opinion. But I think it's good to formulate your own opinions first, and then, build into that as you go into the season.
Yeah, agreed. It's always good to have a process. And if that includes doing a lot of research that other people aren't doing, that's going to help you because you're just not being fed, the same information. And one thing, if you do because I'm someone who, for one, I don't love reading, so I would never read a magazine. But I try to come away with some things from, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so obviously a lot of that stuff is white noise because you do hear the same thing over and over about the same person. But I try to find those underlying messages, and just find some of those underlying stats that they might mention and just really store that in the brain. But yeah, that's enough on process. Let's get to our list. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You can go first. You're the host, so
Okay.
This is your territory. I'll let you go first, and then I can do mine after that.
Okay, so I've got 5 guys. I do have two or three like also rans, so who almost made the list. So if they don't come up on your list, I'll throw them out at the end. Like I said, one of these guys is more of a sleeper candidate, but I like him enough to kind of think that he's going to make a huge jump. Then I have one of these guys as my clear overall number 1, and then the other 3 just sort of are just kind of in the mix. So I'll go ahead and start with just one of my guys that are in the mix, and that is Hayden Hurst, tight end in Atlanta. Now, I don't typically like new players and new offenses and new schemes, but if this guy is as talented as he looked when we saw certain plays and saw certain attributes when he was with the Ravens, he was always behind Mark Andrews, so it was hard for him to make a splash. The stat that really sticks out to me is the Dirk Cutter offense averages 135 targets to the tight end position over the last 3 years. Now that's got to be filled in. As I was talking about to Justin, could Gurley maybe catch a few of those balls? Could you just see Ridley and Julio maybe pad there already? Great catch numbers. Yeah, maybe. But I think Hayden Hurst is somebody who could, and this is definitely one that everybody's talking about, but it's one that I like. So yeah, he made my list.
Yeah, I like Hayden Hurst a lot. Did you see that video of him lifting like a 200-pound bar with like from the ground?
No.
He was laying on the ground holding 200, I think it was 200 and some pounds in the weight room. And he was laying on the ground and then held it in one arm, like He-Man style, holding the sword, and got himself to stand up while holding it. It was nuts. What? Like, I'm like, I would have broke every bone in my body, tore my ACL. Like, the guy is an athletic freak, and for him, it's just opportunity. And he's getting it in Atlanta. We've seen Atlanta utilize the tight end. I definitely think he's a great pivot instead of spending the capital, whether you're in an auction draft or a snake, on Kelsey or Kittle or some of these guys, I think, or Mark Andrews. I definitely think that he's going to be utilized in that offense. And I think it's a great pick. He was honorable mention for me. And it's mostly just because I'm not a big tight end guy. But I think I think he's really going to have a good year. And it's really hard to find a tight end that you could just lock in your lineup week in and week out. There's a handful of them, maybe. And I think he's definitely one of those guys that you can just kind of lock him in there and not worry about it, instead of trying to find the guy who's going to have one catch for one touchdown and, Higbee or somebody like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in our last episode, Justin and I did a mock draft, and Hayden Hurst was a pivotal part of that because Justin took him in the 7th round. He is starting to creep up. I mean, a couple weeks ago, you were able to get Hayden Hurst in the 9th, 10th, 11th round, and now he's creeping up the ADP. And I mean, Justin reached for him a bit. They're at the I'm looking at the results right now. He grabbed him with the 7th or the 10th pick in the 7th round. He reached for him a bit, but he was going to go in a few picks according to his ADP anyway, maybe the first couple picks of the 8th round. So if he continues to climb ADP and you have to use a 5th round pick on him, I'm not as excited. But yeah, to be able to get someone whose trajectory is either what Austin Hooper's was last year, or is maybe even starting to escalate towards a Kittle or a Kelsey, to be able to get a guy like that who could potentially, put up those type of numbers in the 7th round, I'm pretty good with it. I just hope he doesn't continue to climb, and I think he will. That's the only issue I see here. But
yeah, that's the big issue with him, is that everybody's talking about him. He's going to keep moving up, and it just comes down to if you want to, if you have to draft him in the 5th, that's tough. And it's not like a situation where, like Kittle, I mean, what's around him target-wise? It's if you look at Hurst, look what's around him. You got Ridley, you got Julio, you got Gage, who they used last year. So I think definitely he's going to have his opportunities, especially in the red zone, since apparently Matt Ryan hates Julio Jones in the red zone for his entire career. So he's going to get his opportunity. It's just, like you said, is it worth the cost he's going to end up at?
Yeah. All right. I'm ready to hear your first one.
I was taking a sip of coffee. Sorry, forgive me.
That's all right.
All right. So I'm going to go Cam Akers. I almost did the "this is a guy" thing. Like, this is a guy, when you lead it in to build up who you're talking about. Like people in. Chris Harris podcast always talks about that. It cracks me up when they go, "This is a guy." You got to build that suspense. I'm just going to say the name. But Cam Akers, rookie, Florida State, goes to the Rams. I think he's RB 34. Got Darrell Henderson in front of him. Darrell Henderson Jr. Darnell Henderson Jr. I think it's Darrell Henderson Jr.
Darrell, yeah.
Either way, I think he's pretty much primed to take that over. They spent the 2nd round draft capital on him. So they're going to use him. You have the void with Gurley. They have a terrible offensive line, but they do use the zone stretch scheme. So one of the things I look for is I love fantasy. I love zone blocking schemes. So you're talking teams that use zone blocking would be like the Vikings, the Chiefs, the Rams, Packers, 49ers, Bears, Saints, Redskins, now the Browns. A lot of those teams are pretty darn good at offense. And a lot of it's because zone blocking. You don't need athletic, truly skilled offensive linemen. You just need people to take up space and keep blocking at the different levels and protect their zone. And the Rams do this very well, as we saw with Todd Gurley a few years ago before he wasn't the same Todd Gurley anymore. And Cam Akers fits that mold of exactly what McVay wants. And I think he's going to have the opportunity, which is the big thing with any breakout candidate, is to have the opportunity and the touches to make an impact. And I think he's going to have, even if he starts out the season, semi-slow, I think by week 5, week 6, week 7, we're going to start to see him become the primary. Great pass catcher, very quick, a lot of twitch, breaks tackles, super elusive guy. He's a very good blocker coming out of college too, which you don't see a lot. Like Zeke Elliott was a great blocker in pass protection. He's another guy, a rookie coming out, who has a lot of experience with that. So I really like the prospects of Cam Akers. We know what McVay can do with offenses. I think even with a bad offensive line, I think Cam Akers has a chance. And really what is a murky running back class, just running backs in general for fantasy this year, once you get past the first so many, there's a lot of question marks on a lot of guys. So I think if you're going 0 RB strategy, especially, like you can't get, your pick 8, pick 9 in a snake, this is one of those guys, 5th, 6th, 7th round that you could scoop up, who can supplement, like you did with your mock draft, that can supplement, going wide receiver with your first 2 or 3 picks.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more. And this was another one of the things where I was struggling. Like, can I put a rookie as a breakout? I just felt weird about it. But I definitely agree, and this is somebody who I was thinking about for this list. And like you mentioned, I did, go with the 0 RB strategy in the mock draft we did yesterday, and Cam Akers was a guy that I liked, and setting yourself up in 0 RB with rookies who you think could break out and could improve your roster as the season goes along. That's a good strategy, and I love Akers. I love his opportunity. I don't really know, the only thing that scares me is what they'll do with him, especially with the other guys around him, Henderson and Malcolm Brown. Well, they'll probably get a little bit more run early on, and hard to know how they'll use them and how much leash they'll give. But I definitely like that pick. I think he can come out very strong.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Moving on to my next pick. Who do I want to throw out here? All right. I'm gonna go with a guy who
here's a guy
seems to have. He might be, there's someone crowding his space, and he might feel a little nudge to the side. You never know. But here's a guy with a quarterback who may have a breakout season as well. And I'm talking about Christian Kirk of the Cardinals, who they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, and a lot of people are getting excited about him in that offense, which I don't blame you. But again, at the same time, I don't love going against my, my Hayden Hurst love, but I don't like guys who change teams. And I definitely don't like guys who change teams during a global pandemic who don't get a lot of time with their quarterback. Now, Hopkins is a tremendous route runner. And so as long as he does his part and Kyler Murray can get the ball to him, he may be fine. But I think it's going to take a lot of attention off of Kirk. I think it's going to open up the field a lot more. And I think Kirk is definitely primed to have a great season. Also, the Cardinals target the wide receiver position more than any other position when it comes to throwing the ball. So they're not always looking at their tight ends. They're not always checking down to their running backs. When they're throwing to the wide receiver. So that's a stat I like in support of Christian Kirk as a breakout candidate.
Yeah, and I liked Kirk a lot last year too. He's someone I had on my squad. Really liked him. It's hard to, like you said, I mean, anytime a guy switches teams, and this year is very strange with the COVID and everything going on. But I do know DeAndre Hopkins is an incredible wide receiver, incredible route runner. He was grossly underutilized in Houston. And I mean, you can go on for days talking about the failures of Bill O'Brien, and I have no idea how he's still a coach there. But to basically take a weapon like Hopkins and use him, like a first down guy, just like run 5 yards, 6 yard, 10, the 10-yard routes. It's like, take the lid off, let this guy do what he does. He's an incredible player. And I fully expect in Arizona, he's going to get that opportunity. I just think, like you said, it'll take a little bit to get rhythm. So I think definitely in those early weeks, Kirk's going to still get the volume we're accustomed to. And then it'll be interesting once they get more into a groove in that offense to see if Kirk is able to maintain that with Larry Fitzgerald there. If anything, I think Fitz might be the one to kind of fade off a little bit into the background, and Kirk and Hopkins be those guys.
Well, you would hope Fitz would be the one. I mean, he's the old guy out there, and I mean they'll run 3-4 receiver sets like all day, so they can all three be out there as much as the team wants them to. But yeah, you would think that in preparation for most likely Fitzgerald's last season, has he announced whether he's going to retire after this year? I can't remember.
Every year he, just keeps coming back.
It
That's the
feels
thing.
like it's his farewell tour. So whether that or whether he's got another year or two in him, the guys for your future building for the next 4 years to try to win a championship, you're going to be putting that love behind Kirk and Hopkins. So we probably want them on the field together. So yeah, I agree that Fitz will probably be the one to to kind of be faded out, but like Christian Kirk. And who's up for you?
This is a guy. This is a guy. That's true. I really like this player. Coming out of college, I loved him. I thought he went to a great spot and a bad spot at the same time when he was drafted, and just a dynamic workhorse sort of guy. But number 4 for me is Alexander Mattison, and in Minnesota. I say great and bad at the same time because he went to the perfect place for him because he's a one-cut guy, and he goes to the zone blocking scheme in Minnesota, and then but he goes to a squad that already had Dalvin Cook, so it's like it stinks that he got it stinks that he's stuck behind Dalvin Cook. But if Dalvin Cook holds out, and I'm not just picking this because whether Dalvin Cook holds out or not, I think Alexander Mattison is a really good player. And when you see him run, he's got burst. He can do all the things Dalvin Cook does. Even more so, he's just explosive. When you see this guy get the ball, he's a battering ram. He's going to run into everything. He's going to run over everything. He did it in college. And it's just, he's just one cut and go. And, that's really what Minnesota's looking for. And we've seen what Dalvin Cook's been able to do. And Madison, when he's gotten his shot, has done pretty well, sometimes in blowout games or, where Cook's been injured and stuff. And unfortunately, last year when Cook got injured towards the end of the season, so did he. And it was the Mike Boone show. But I definitely like what he's capable of. And I think if, we've seen with holdouts with Zeke last year and Melvin Gordon and other players, and then also given Dalvin Cook's injury history, you're going to tell me Dalvin Cook with no offseason coming in week 4, I'm gonna trust that. I'm not trusting that. And so whether Dalvin Cook holds out or not, I'm going to be big on Alexander Mattison. And I hope Cook actually comes back because I think that'll drop Madison's value and drop him off everybody's radar. And I think the value would be much better at that point. But if you go and watch highlights of the guy, and he's just a fun watch to see what he's able to do when he gets the ball.
Yeah, when there's almost no handcuff you'd rather have if your guy goes down than Alexander Mattison. One of the most talented backups that's out there, and he doesn't get as much like split. As much talent as that guy has. They don't utilize the split running back quite as much as other teams do. So if Dalvin holds out and Madison gets the start, you can pretty much imagine that he's going to be as much of who'd they use? Amir Abdullah a little bit last year. They will obviously, work in some other guys, but I don't think the split will be, quite as severe. I think Madison would get, the majority of the run. So I like that. I like that for sure. And so you like Madison even if Dalvin Cook plays?
I would definitely take you can get him in the later rounds or if you're in auction at a better value. But I definitely would want him on the roster just because I don't trust the longevity of Dalvin Cook normally, like in a regular offseason.
Yeah.
If you tack on a holdout and the COVID restraints and everything else going on, like I'm not going to trust Dalvin Cook. I didn't trust Dalvin Cook before. So for me, just to have him, it's an asset, whether, it could be a trade asset down the road. It could be, if you're going 0 RB, someone to pick up in the later rounds, even if Cook comes back, just to have as an option. Cause he's a gold mine. If Cook's out of the way, he's a gold mine.
Yeah.
And, all he needs is that opportunity, I think. And then obviously in that offense, since they're, since 1955 and they run the antiquated offense that they do, and don't utilize any of their weapons besides the running back, I think definitely, if you're going to go after Vikings players, that's where you want to target.
Yeah, for sure. And you also mentioned that you are talking about this if you were drafting today, and with the fact that we don't know what's going to happen with Dalvin, there's still a lot of people just being leery of that situation and sort of leaving it alone. They're probably saying like, well, I'm not going to touch Dalvin. I'm also not going to touch Madison either. So that would probably cause him to, you to be able to get him in a really good spot in a draft if it happened, tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, for all the listeners out there, I'm not particularly fond of the Vikings coaching staff. So, as a Stephon Diggs owner and a former Thielen owner, they just underutilize their weapons, and they could do so much more. And they had DiFilippo there, and then canned him because he wasn't running the ball enough. And I don't know. It just, if you're gonna grab somebody from the Vikings offense, make sure it's a running back.
Let's make a list of the coaching staffs that Mike hates: the Vikings, the Bears. Who else?
The Bears. Don't get me started on the Bears. And I like Matt Nagy. He's a genius. He's a really smart guy, and it's just, I think more than anything, he just doesn't have a quarterback there. But there's a lot of teams. Big Dick Nick. No, there's a lot of coaches out there. I think that we all play this game, and it's easy for us to sit there and we watch football, and everybody wants to be a critic and that, but it's easy to criticize. But so you want to pull your hair out sometimes when you're in fantasy watching these games, and you're like Matt Nagy last year with David Montgomery. It's like you have a weapon, you have no other weapons besides that guy, and they're like, hey, let's give him 12 touches. Oh, we lost.
It's like someone's coming after you, trying to hurt you, and you have a gun in your pocket, but you pull out your slingshot, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to take him down with my slingshot.
Yeah, pretty much.
I can't even remember that running back's name who was on the team and got the early run last year when Montgomery was just sitting on the bench. He was that guy who bounced around from like Seattle, and he bounced around a couple teams.
I can't remember his name either
in the preseason, but yeah, that's the point. Is they're running out guys like that when they have a weapon like Montgomery.
And they got Tariq Cohen. It's just like,
yeah,
I don't know. It makes no sense. I digress. I can go on for days talking about that.
All right, let's move on to mine third. And I've decided to actually, during this podcast, I've decided to sort of change my structure of this pick. I actually have a tie for this one because this is a guy. These are two guys that are in a really good system. And I mentioned this yesterday. I think that one of these guys are going to come out. I think someone's really going to benefit from Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis. So this is a tie. This is my partial sleeper, partial actual breakout. So initially, I had Nyheim Hines on this list because I think he's somebody who is a sleeper, and hence that he's going to have a much harder time being an actual breakout because of his position in the offense, what it's been the last 3 years. But Phillip Rivers is great at his reads, and if he can't find that number one read and he knows he doesn't have anything there, he quickly goes to either tight end or running back. I should have looked up the stat about Phillip Rivers and his running backs, but I mean, it's good. If you're a pass catching running back on a Phillip Rivers led team, you're going to catch some balls, and same goes for the tight end. So, I think Indianapolis is in a really good spot this year, just as a team to possibly win that division and maybe make some noise in the playoffs. So yeah, I like Nyheim Hines as somebody who could catch a lot of passes this year, but at the same time, I love Jonathan Taylor also as possibly somebody who can shoulder the bulk of the carries as well as catch some passes also. So I don't know how they're going to divide up. And you also have Marlon Mack. So I don't really know how they're going to divide that up, but I see Marlon Mack getting the early work at the beginning of the season. Obviously as the veteran, Jonathan Taylor's going to have to kind of earn his spot. But I just sort of see Nyheim Hines being that weapon, like the James White, like the Tariq Cohen. But I think unlike Tariq Cohen, where he just has boom and bust games, I think because of the consistency of Rivers, that Hines is going to be somebody you can potentially count on if things go his way. And it's a shot in the dark for sure. But yeah, my initial pick is Nyheim Hines. I'm also putting a / Jonathan Taylor because I think Jonathan Taylor is probably the best running back. I like him better than CEH. Did I say that right? Yeah, CEH, Clyde Edwards. Even though he's in a great spot also with Kansas City. But yeah, love Jonathan Taylor this year. Love the potential for Nyheim Hines.
I love Indianapolis's offensive line, and that's always something I look at this time of year for fantasy. And obviously, they have a great line, but those running backs, my fear is that they are going to completely cannibalize one another.
It's possible.
Like if I'm Indianapolis right now, I'm like, can I trade Marlon Mack for somebody? Just because there's too many mouths to feed in that backfield. We have no idea how it's going to be utilized. What if Indianapolis isn't playing from behind? That's going to affect how much Hines is used. And a lot of the reason Phillip Rivers had so many targets to the running back in San Diego is because they were constantly losing or behind in games. And so they were, defenses are going to back up to prevent the deep ball, and you're going to dump off passes a lot. Also, he's not very mobile. So, he might be the least mobile quarterback in the history of quarterbacks. I think Brady passed him up. But yeah, so I mean, it's hard to gauge. What can we transfer from San Diego's offense to Indianapolis' offense? I feel like those are two different worlds, and so it's hard to say he's going to do one thing like he did in the other spot. We know what his tendencies are, but we also know Indianapolis, I think, is a far better coaching staff, far better scheme, and so it'll be interesting to see what they do with that backfield. That being said, Jonathan Taylor, I might be the only person that follows fantasy that does not like Jonathan Taylor. And I'm a Big Ten guy. I'm an Ohio boy, and 440, got my Lorain, Ohio represent up there on Lake Erie, the majestic shores of Lake Erie. But I got to watch Jonathan Taylor's whole career because I watched Big Ten football. And what I saw was a guy who got 40 carries a game, that beat up on bad defenses and, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and would eventually break one against Northwestern that padded his stats and made him look better than what he was. I don't see burst. I don't see a playmaker. I don't see somebody who is going to translate well to the NFL. I just, I could be wrong, and it's happened before. But from what I saw, I just didn't see a guy in college. I saw another Wisconsin running back who gets so many carries because they never throw the ball and they never have a quarterback who's worth anything. And they win 8 or 9 games every year. They run the ball 40 times a game. And this is just another one of those guys, I think. And, I personally think I like Marlon Mack. I think Marlon Mack is a dynamic running back. I don't know why they picked a running back. I think they need a wide receiver. Paris Campbell hasn't stayed healthy. T.Y. Hilton's getting up there and he's had his health issues. I think they could have gone wide receiver. They could have gone defense. So I didn't quite understand the pick. So I'll be the only person in the fantasy world that says, don't take Jonathan Taylor. I'll be that guy. And I know all of our guys in our home league are listening to this saying, Mike's not going to take Jonathan Taylor. And then they're also like, Mike is evil enough to love Jonathan Taylor and rail on him on a podcast to make us think that he doesn't like him. So it could go both ways. Nobody trusts me. But I can honestly say that I am not a big Jonathan Taylor guy. not to crap on your pick here.
No, that's fine. I was going to say, finally, we disagree on something. I'm waiting for this. Like, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I don't like the fact that so far we've been like, yeah, good pick. Yeah, good pick.
You're like, great job, Kris.
Yeah, but I definitely understand what you mean. The cannibalization of each other could absolutely happen. In a perfect world for me, Marlon Mack starts out the season, so he's somebody who, if you're not going to be able, you don't really want Mack and Taylor on the same team, and you probably can't. I guess you could get them, but if you're drafting Mack, it's because you need someone early in the season. And maybe it's because you went wide receiver early and you need that stable pick that's falling to like the 8th, 9th round. I totally guessed on the round that he's getting picked in, but
I think you're right on ADP. I think that's about where he's going.
Yeah, it's something like that. And then if you're drafting Taylor, it's because you're waiting to see if he can be a weapon in the end. And I just think Hines is just going to be that guy all year who's just going to get the pass catching work regardless. So that's initially why I put him on my list. And I totally see a situation where Hines is drafted late and then dropped early on and he's never relevant, again. But
the investment's low.
Yeah,
so,
and
it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, exactly. And I certainly, I will listen when it comes to rookies because I am a person who does not watch college football. I always try to make an attempt. It's like the same way with baseball. Like I want to like it, but I just don't like it as much as the NFL. I don't find it as entertaining. They're not as talented, and it's just I don't get drawn to it. So me with rookies, it's just me watching YouTube highlights. So I'm not watching them in game, and I definitely respect your position or anybody who watches college football as close as you do. And I will make a mental note of that. But I liked what I've seen on the highlights. But how did you feel about Melvin Gordon when he came out? I'm just curious. Another Wisconsin running back.
I think for me, when Melvin Gordon came out, because, that's the one everybody points to with Wisconsin running backs when you say this. So I think there's, 24 Wisconsin running backs who've all failed miserably in the NFL. And then there's, the one guy, the shining light of Melvin Gordon. I liked Melvin Gordon coming out because he was a pass catcher.
Okay.
And he was fast and he went to the right team. And so I never really viewed him in the same vein as I do, a lot of the other Wisconsin running backs that have come out that everybody's touted. Go watch YouTube highlights of Jonathan Taylor versus Ohio State or Jonathan Taylor versus even Michigan, which I hate saying that whole word in public. But it's just him running into a wall of guys. And I don't see the vision. I see a guy who's behind a great offensive line, and against bad teams, they made holes for him. And he had one great run against Ohio State. And I remember when it happened, just like, how did they let that happen? He had one big run against them, but outside of that, just not much. And so, I think Melvin Gordon definitely is the exception.
Okay. All right. Well, we've spent way too much time on Indianapolis running backs, so let's move over to you. And I'm curious. So we've had no overlap so far. You're not pivoting because okay, you got your 5 guys. You're not just okay. I'm just making sure. So
no, I have Jonathan Taylor was not on my list, believe it or not.
Okay,
not on there.
All right.
But number 3 for me, this is a guy who's going to be on everybody's list. This is probably the most common breakout candidate pick of them all.
Maybe we're going to overlap.
We will overlap now. But Hollywood Brown is my number 3.
That's not who I thought you were talking
about.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. I thought for sure when I started talking about it. I love this guy. Like, he's fantasy gold. He's the poor man's Tyreek Hill. He's, Lamar's still figuring it out. And if Hollywood could just stay on the field and stay healthy, I mean, he did 46 for 584 and 7 touchdowns in 14 games. In a world where basically wide receiver 12 to 48 is like the same guy, I have no problem jumping up to get Hollywood sooner than most people would go. And the opportunities there. He's a big play threat. He's an incredible route runner. Just super fast. I mean, you got cornerbacks in his rookie year playing 15, 20 yards off of him just because of speed. And with that offense, the way they run the ball, the single coverage he gets, if he can just stay healthy, like he's a top 5, top 10 wide receiver. And, I think a lot of people are kind of on this hype train with him. And it's one of those where you're going to hear it everywhere, and I think they're all right. He's that good.
Yeah. I do have Hollywood on my, my also rans on my list that almost made it. I mean, I absolutely think he could be a potential breakout candidate. I left him off because I've heard some chatter about him. I thought he might be on your list. And I do agree with everything you said. I mean, the man was hurt last year and played through injuries pretty much the entire season. I always had that, that cross next to his name showing that he was on the injury report.
Or touched by God, that there's a cross next to him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he was always questionable. So I get it. And I just realized I was looking at my, I don't mean to bring up like home league too much because that bores people, but I was looking at my rosters, and I was talking to you about my keepers yesterday, and I didn't even realize I have Hollywood Brown on my roster. So I can actually keep him this year if I want to. And I think it's for $1. I'll have to go and look closer at that.
It's okay. You'll trade him, so it doesn't matter.
But yeah, I definitely agree with Hollywood. I mean, yeah, Lamar's still figuring stuff out. Imagine if Lamar gets better at passing. I'm really stuck in this, like, who's going to be the best quarterback. Right now I have Lamar 1, but I could easily put Mahomes there because, I mean, you could see Lamar if last year was his best season and he doesn't really ever come close to that. Would you be surprised?
I think there is 2 ways you can look at this. One, he keeps progressing and he ends up a great player. And the second side of it is the curious case of Robert Griffith III. And, rookie of the year blows up, puts the world on fire, and then injuries and everything else catch up to him.
Yeah.
The fact that he couldn't read defenses caught up to him because defenses figured out how to defend him pretty quickly. And defenses adapt. They're going to adapt to Lamar. It's just, is he going to continue to grow and get better? He cannot rely on running constantly like he is. He's going to get hurt. Randall Cunningham, had it happen to him. All these guys that have come along, that even Steve Young and different people who are mobile quarterbacks had their fair share of injuries. And, he cannot rely on just being a runner. And I think we saw his passing improve last year.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Dramatically. And I think that'll continue. And it's not Louisville bias since we are in
right.
in Louisville, but I think he'll continue to grow and get better. So I tend to side with you with him. I think he's the number 1. I mean, it's a 1A and 1B between him and Mahomes, but I definitely feel like he's going to keep growing. And I think Harbaugh and that coaching staff's good enough to lead him in the right direction and not have it be a Cam Newton situation where it's just like, yeah, Cam, you run all the time and you're going to get, you're going to be out of the league by the time you're 30 years old. I think they'll do a good job of protecting him and teaching him and allowing him to improve.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens this year with Lamar and his relationship on the field with Hollywood Brown. And it should be exciting. Okay, the guy I thought we were both talking about that are
is this your number 2?
This is my number 2, yeah. And this is a guy that a lot of people are talking about, so I thought we were going on the same path here. This is a guy who, just like Christian Kirk, had someone else move in on him. This was a rookie who moved in, not DeAndre Hopkins. But you're looking at somebody who is looked at as the number 2 receiver and who basically put up stats very similar to the number 1 receiver, except you can get the number 1 receiver. You have to pay a second or third round pick for Amari Cooper, but you get to get Michael Gallup in, I'm guessing again here, 5th, 6th, 7th round. And I love that, and I love him for a breakout. This is another guy I struggled with because I've heard people refer to him last season that was his breakout season. But I just don't I don't see that. I mean, he was certainly viable in some weeks for fantasy, but this is a guy, again, this is a guy whom I should have added all this up front before I revealed who I was talking about. But he missed 2 weeks with injury. He had 5 games with single digits and only 4 games with 20 or more points. So those games were, I mean, those are definitely breakout games for him. But as far as a breakout season with Witten being gone and Randall Cobb being gone, it's 166 targets that's available. Michael Gallup has the potential to really take over as the number 1 receiver on that team. If all things break right. But if not, if him and Amari are just, 1A and 1B on that team, that's still, viable for a breakout season for Gallup. So I really like him, especially where he's going. Now, again, just like Hayden Hurst, a lot of momentum getting behind him. Could he be, drifting up the ADP? That might change my perspective. I still think he could break out, but whether I really want him and would reach for him, that might change, but I still think he could have a very solid season.
Yeah, I love Michael Gallup last year. I drafted him last year. My concern this year would be CeeDee Lamb and, that offense. I have general concerns just with distribution. I've never been a big Amari guy. I think he's very off and on, but, what's the word I'm looking for? The consistency hasn't been there with Amari Cooper. So I think Gallup's a great player. And so it kind of shocked me when they took CeeDee Lamb. But, if you have a talented player that in the draft that you really like, you just take them. You don't worry about stuff like that. So, but I think, that's another possible cannibalization sort of situation where Gallup isn't getting the target share that he necessarily should because of trying to incorporate CeeDee Lamb. But I also think people overvalue CeeDee Lamb in a sense because, like we've already talked about, coming, rookie wide receivers, in a different sort of off season than we're ever going to see, shortened with COVID concerns, how quickly does he pick up the offense? They're changing the offense. So, what are we even going to see out of them? So, but I think, when you look at stuff like that, the number one thing you look at is talent. Is the player talented, and do they have an opportunity? And I think Gallup checks both of those boxes. So I'm not going to disagree with you because I really do like Michael Gallup. I had him as an honorable mention because he's falling, and people are all talking about CeeDee Lamb and other players, and Michael Gallup is just, once again, just falling down draft boards. And so he's definitely a guy where, if you go running back heavy at the beginning of the draft, that I think in the later rounds, like you were saying, I think I've seen him fall into the 9th, which is crazy.
Wow.
But I think, picking up a guy of his caliber and talent level at that point is a really good move.
Yeah, I agree. And I obviously, I mentioned it when I'm talking about a guy moving in, on his turf, being CeeDee Lamb. It's definitely another, could these guys cannibalize themselves situation. And I don't think the Cowboys were necessarily looking to take Lamb, but they were just surprised that he fell into their lap. And so I think they were just like, well, we have to do this. I think his talent kind of forces us just to take best player available, even though we were going to take, X person. I think we're going to take Lamb. And yeah, I even though it is a crowded, wide receiver depth chart, because of I don't like rookie receivers anyway. Now this guy may be so talented that he doesn't really, fall into that rookie receiver kind of trap situation. But with COVID, just not being in camp, not throwing with Dak, I think that could set him back a little bit year one. So yeah, I still like the emergence of the continuing emergence of Gallup. So
good.
All right,
I like it.
Where are you at?
Number 2.
Still no crossover.
I went back and forth on this.
Okay.
Because and defining what a breakout is. So this is one of the higher drafted guys that I think some people might not think of as a breakout necessarily, but I like when we were trying to define what a breakout is. Can they crack the top 10? Can they crack the top 5? And I think this is a guy that could possibly be one of those guys that does that. But number 2, Bobby Woods. Robert Woods over there. So 90 catches, 1,134 yards last year, only 2 touchdowns. I think it was wide receiver 19, 139 targets. So the reason I bring him up that high is he's one of those guys that when you're drafting, you look at, and he doesn't have the sexy name. He's not one of those guys that you look at and you're just like, Robert Woods. Like, you don't think of the 139 targets. You don't think of those things. You may think, oh, he only had 2 touchdowns. And I think with what we saw last year with the Rams offense toward the back end of the season, with the type of personnel they were running, 12 personnel or whatever you want to call it, with the 2 tight ends, and Cooper Kupp coming off the field, Robert Woods was the main guy. He was the number 1 on that team. That team does not have a great defense. They're going to throw the ball a lot. And I think Robert Woods is going to get even more targets this year. I think he can crack, over 100 catches this year. And I think the touchdown numbers are due to go up. This is, like we talk about with Julio Jones and some of these guys, where you look at some of their touchdowns in seasons and it's just more, outside the box. It's not the norm. It's an aberration, or whatever you want to call it, where I think, if Robert Woods gets those targets this year, I think he's going to get 5, 6, 7, 8 touchdowns with those targets, with those catches. If you're in a PPR league, especially full point PPR, like this is one of those guys that can drop into the 3rd or beginning of the 4th round and he should, where you can scoop them up and really supplement those top 2 running backs if you're going RB. I've always loved him as a player, and I think people tend to devalue him when they should.
Man, I wish that we had more headbutting here, but I love that. I seriously considered putting him on this list, but he was another one of those guys who I was like, has he already broken out? And
he's wide receiver 19, I think, last year, or
didn't he have a better season the year before?
He might have. Yeah, he might have.
He's just always been very. I guess he has never broken out like you may. Are you saying that he could be a top 10 guy, a top 5 guy?
I think he could be a top 10 guy. Okay. If he had 5 touchdowns instead of 2 touchdowns last year, he's a top 10 guy. That's what we're talking about here. And then he's also a kind of wide receiver who's not going to burn you. Like Odell burned people last year. When you're taking these guys, especially if you go strong RB, you want a consistent wide receiver that you can rely on week in and week out. And he's one of those guys who he's going to get his targets, he's going to get his catches. And you just hope that the touchdowns are going to be there. And I think I really like him every year. And I think he just gets overlooked.
Yeah. Robert Woods has a tremendous floor, and he also has the potential for a great ceiling. So that's definitely the type of player that you want in fantasy. And he's being drafted as so. He's getting drafted in the late 3rd round, and like you said, sometimes dropping to the 4th. And if I doubt you get him in the 5th, but maybe it depends on your league. He's not a sexy name, and that could, if he does fall that far, I mean, that's a tremendous value. So I love Bob Woods and that pick. Mm-hmm. All right, we're moving on to my last pick, and I saved him for last because I think he could be the player that has the potential to have the biggest breakout based on the situation, depending on what else happens with the team. And this is Miles Sanders. He's on a team that historically, with this coach, people put this narrative on him that, he only uses multiple running backs. He never runs one running back. But I just think that could possibly be because he just hadn't found the right guy. And if Sanders continues to do what he was doing at the end of last season, he has the potential to be Christian McCaffrey light, as far as being the primary runner, being a pass catcher who can not only catch screen passes and little dump offs, but you saw Miles Sanders run, catch some passes that were like, you're looking at like 30 yards deep at times. I think there was at least 2 or 3 catches that he made last year that were in the 20 to 30 yard range. And it's a guy who just has, and I'm definitely like, this is definitely a flag plant for me to take a page out of the Chris Harris book with, the guy you're planting your flags on. But it is a risky pick. Like if I was going to anchor my team with Miles Sanders as my number 1 running back, that's definitely risky. Because maybe he just turns out to be Miles Sanders who started the season. But I think he's got the potential to really be. This is a boom pick, I think, because he could let you down, but he's got the potential to just have unlimited potential. So that's what I like about Sanders here. I don't really have stats to back this up. It's more of just a gut feeling and what I saw and monitored last year and what I think could be going forward.
Christian McCaffrey light, huh?
Yeah, I think he could be.
You know what I don't like?
What do you not like?
Cool Whip light. I don't like Bud Light.
Wow.
I don't like. I'm trying to think of other lights. That I don't like.
Crystal Light.
Terrible.
There's not a Crystal Heavy, but I guess that's Kool-Aid.
I love the name Crystal. Don't get me wrong.
You're marrying one.
I'm marrying one. But I don't see it. I'm sorry. And I love that you pick people that I don't like. And this is why this works, because both of us have done this a long time. And we have our flag plant guys that we feel adamantly about. And then we have people that we just don't like. And I don't like Miles Sanders that much either. And once again, this is like the Jonathan Taylor thing. And usually you're the contrarian. Usually I'm the one that's more, straightforward. And you like to be the contrarian more so than I. But he had the opportunity last year. And Boston Scott carried the load down the stretch. And that's what would worry me about Miles Sanders. And that they've been reluctant to give him the keys. And they chose to use Boston Scott, all 5'3" of him, instead of giving Miles Sanders the full share. And even when, was it Jordan Howard? I think Jordan Howard was there last year. Yeah. Jordan Howard came back from injury. He was getting the ball. And it just seems like, well, one, in that offense, they don't like to give the same person the lion's share. And Frank Reich, that's kind of the system. Is Frank Reich? And no, Doug Peterson. Why am I thinking Frank Reich's in Indianapolis? And Doug Peterson's offense, they don't typically just load up one guy. And it could be a situation where they say, this year we're going to do it. We finally found our guy. And I'm wrong at that point. But it scares the shit out of me that Boston Scott was the guy they used. And some of that was because Sanders got hurt. I mean, I know Sanders had injuries.
Yeah.
But I think he's a talented guy. There's no question of that. You can watch tape of him, and Miles Sanders is talented. But I just, for whatever reason, it's not. I haven't seen it on the field. And part of the thing with breakouts is like you want to get them before you see it on the field, so it makes perfect sense. Maybe he's a talented guy, like I said, but it's just in that offense, in that offensive line, they just lost their guard, Brooks for the year. Peters is old.
True. That does scare me.
Even if Peters comes back, he's old, and he's a big dude. He's oft injured. So you don't know what's going to happen with the offensive line. There's the wide receiver we don't know. So I think there's a lot of question marks with Philly's offense. I think if you get into the first few weeks and he's getting 70% of the snaps, 60% of the snaps, even 55, I think you feel really good about Miles Sanders. But the thing I don't like is the amount he's going for, is the draft capital that's spent on him in auction. Is the draft capital spent on him in snake drafts. It's too high. And this is what I mean with, there's a handful of running backs at the top that people are going to go with. And then because there's a void of consistent running backs after that certain guys are being plucked from that group and moved forward and moved higher than what they need to be because they're a running back, and we all need running backs. And I think he's one of those guys that's just moving a little too up the board for my liking. And, had he come out and been the guy down the stretch last year, for sure, definitely I'd put him up there. But I think he's getting pulled forward because of that void after CMC and Zeke and even Derrick Henry and guys like that. I think he hasn't proven anything, and he's getting pulled up the board. And I wouldn't reach for him at this point until, we see or hear that he's going to be the guy.
Yeah, I definitely understand a few of your points. The fact that he hasn't necessarily proven anything over a long-term basis, and that the price you pay for him, I mean, you're not getting him at a value. I mean, you're drafting him where you would expect
where his ceiling is.
Yeah, you would expect him to produce. So I do understand that point, and the loss of the lineman, the guard there, does also tend to worry me. So those are definitely great points that I've thought about. And if they do sign another guy, it also kind of takes a little bit of that edge off for me as far as believing in what he can or can't do. Boston Scott did have a few decent games last year, but a lot of that I just didn't see a lot out of Scott that makes me think that they're going to lean on him. I mean,
I would hope not. He's not good.
Yeah.
I just think he's just another guy, so they shouldn't lean on him. They should go to Sanders, and then they've just been reluctant to do so.
Yeah. So if they don't bring in anybody else, then I'm still going to feel good about the Miles Sanders pick. If they do, I might question it. But I will take Christian McCaffrey light all day though, even though I don't like Cool Whip light or
Michelob light.
Michelob Ultra light. I mean, I'll take a pass catcher if he's projected to do what everybody thinks that he's going to do, which is catch balls and be the primary runner. I mean, you don't get that a lot in fantasy anymore.
No, you don't.
You just have either you're a ground and pound or you're a run cat or you're a pass catcher.
You view him like I view David Montgomery. This is a super talented guy who, for one reason or another, they just won't give the damn ball to and realize what they have. And I think that's kind of like the way you look at him is how I look at David Montgomery, where I'm like, this guy could set the world on fire if he's just given the opportunity, but for some reason they want to use this guy or use that guy or use this guy, and it's just maddening. And I think that certainly Peterson and Nagy are certainly in the same vein of those frustrating coaches to where you're just like pulling your hair out, like give the guy the ball, like give him his chance. And I think that's your love fest for Mr. Cool Whip Light I went to Miles Sanders. Cool Whip Light is so bad. You ever have it? It's so bad.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's bad. Just get the original. It's like it's less calories. Yeah, but it tastes like shit. So, I'll use a little less of the real stuff.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about Cool Whip. But I think David Montgomery is that guy for me, like he is for you. And David Montgomery is an honorable mention for me on this, but he's not my number one.
Okay.
It would have been a cool segue if that's how it worked, and I could have done it, but I'm not going to deviate from the sanctity of my list here.
From the list, I assume that you saved your favorite breakout for last, which is coming up in about 3 seconds.
Yes. Okay. So this is a guy. I need a sip of coffee real quick. Sorry.
Okay. It's not cold yet?
No, it's still warm. It's holding firm.
Nice.
So this is a guy who I've been waiting on for years to break out. And he's a higher draft pick, and he should have broken out already. I loved him in college. I didn't like some of the things he did in college off the field. I'm not speaking for the player, off the field. But as far as an on-the-field talent, he plays for a terrible team.
Oh, my gosh.
Terrible coach. And I've always, the talent level is off the charts. Like, this is a Zeke Elliott level talent guy who's just been on a crappy team and hasn't had the chance to really show off what he can do. So number one for me is Joe Mixon. And
I mentioned him earlier. Were you like squirming when I was like, yeah, like
I smiled a little bit. And to me, he is, because, like, let's face facts, the Bengals stink every year. And I don't like their coach, and I don't like some of the things they did. But I do like Joe Burrow. And I do like that they're trying to fix the offensive line, and they're a zone scheme. And Mixon's a zone scheme running back, and he's incredibly dynamic, incredibly agile. He can catch balls out of the backfield. I'm not worried about Gio Bernard. I'm not worried about the whatever guy they drafted in the 5th round or whatever his name is. That team has talent. They have a talented quarterback coming in as a rookie. And when you have a rookie quarterback, you got to lean on a running back and make him a workhorse. And if there was ever a year when at least Cincinnati can have a good offense and score points, even though their defense, and that's the other thing, their defense is terrible. They're going to be playing from behind. Like this, everything adds up for Joe Mixon finally to be that guy and have that year to be a top 5 guy. If he does not do it this year, he's never going to do it. And I think if you're going to invest in him, if you're going to go, I don't know what his ADP is right now. I'm going to say 2nd round, late 2nd, probably somewhere in that range, mid to late 2nd. But to me, especially this year, he's like, if you had me draft today, who am I taking between him and Derrick Henry? I'm taking him because I want upside. And I think Joe Mixon having that kind of year is the kind of guy that wins you a championship. Derrick Henry gets you to playoffs. I think someone like Mixon breaking out wins you a championship. And that's why we do this. We do this and find breakouts and do this exercise and play fantasy football to win titles. And I think Mixon, to me, is that guy. And I think just give him the ball, make life easier for Joe Burrow. Hopefully they get A.J. Green back healthy. Boyd's been a good wide receiver. They still have Ross. There's weapons there. And I think that as bad as Cincinnati has been, I don't think they're going to be, I don't think they're going to be worse than they were last year. And I think if Mixon stays healthy, he's just going to get so much like crazy volume where you could call him Christian McCaffrey, like if you want to. I just really like Mixon for this upcoming season.
What is it that you see out of Mixon? Because I'm going to kind of, the same thing that you did with me with Miles Sanders. Mm-hmm. Now Mixon has a few more years in the league, but what has he ever done to really impress you? Like what seasons do you point out that, and I understand the coaching changes and Joe Burrow's there, like a more competent quarterback. But I mean, he's been somebody who is really boom or bust and will give you single digit weeks and just really, I mean, occasionally you get good games at him. So what's different this year?
I think it's one of those things where I don't look at stats. Like I just watch the player, and when you watch what he does and what he's capable of, like his elusiveness is just that offensive line was so bad. That might be one of the worst offensive lines I've ever seen in my life. It's just, I mean, they couldn't block anybody. And so supposedly going to a more heavy zone blocking scheme this year, really allowing Joe Mixon to be Joe Mixon, I think is really what I'm looking for. And then just the player, his elusiveness, the speed, the agility, the cut, his ability to, break tackles and get through and bust big plays. If they can just figure out how to get that offensive line to be like mediocre or like even less than mediocre, just be serviceable, I think would be a big help to him. So for me, it's really just about the player. Like you talked about with Miles Sanders, you just watch the guy. Or like a lot of people, it's like when you look at Saquon Barkley, you're just like, yeah, that guy, just watch him run and you're just enamored. And I see a lot of that in Mixon, just the talent level that I don't see in other guys. There's guys that get stats. There's really good running backs in the league. And then when I watch Mixon, I just see a different sort of cat. Like he's a different guy. And so it's more of a gut feeling, like you said with Miles Sanders. Like we haven't seen it yet, but I think we can.
It's interesting how, we can look how different people just look at guys and see different things. Cause I hear Mixon touted and I'm reading things, about Mixon and for some reason, and I would give him because of all the things that you mentioned about, he's not playing under a Marvin Lewis offense anymore. And, he wasn't last year either, but, that given the fact that he's got a new quarterback, I understand his potential. And I guess the reason I look at a guy like Miles Sanders over a guy like this is because we're going into the fourth year of Joe Mixon's career and he hasn't shown any signs of being a running back that can carry the weight. Now we definitely see running backs come into their own. I mean, players, in general come into their own much later than we think. And sometimes it just takes a couple extra years to really put it together up here and, in the head and really, kind of devote everything in their life to being, the best running back or the best player that they can be. You see that sometimes late in their career. For me, like Miles Sanders as a year 2, maybe even going into a year 3 guy, I would want to bet on that more than a guy who I've seen going into his 4th year, just disappoint on occasion. And I guess that there's more info there that shows that he can, really let your team down when he puts up, 3 fantasy points, 5 fantasy points. So I guess I'm betting more on the unknown, but that's not to say Mixon can't be one of those guys because he is kind of a guy who's, like you say, like kind of got in trouble a little bit, didn't always make the best decisions in college. And so maybe he's just a late bloomer as far as being, responsible, really focusing on football. Maybe he's doing that this year and maybe he could be that guy, but I like it. I was considering him, didn't know if he qualified and he wasn't really, up there for me, but he did pop into my head when I'm thinking about making this list. So
I think with him, like people just like when you say Joe Mixon, typically people don't get excited. Yeah. And so they think of the bad, like you're talking like the single digit games and stuff like that. So from that perspective, that's why I think he's a breakout is people don't think positive thoughts about Cincinnati's offense or Joe Mixon. Like you pick him reluctantly. People are like, guess I take Joe Mixon. It's like, when you're at a wedding and you go up and you say, hey, let me get a bourbon. And they're like, we just got Johnny Walker Black Label. And you're just like, well, shit, I guess I'll go with this. It's all we got is Doers. And you're like, not Doers. It's that sort of thing. Like you're never happy about taking them. You just, in your mind, you take them because you feel like you're supposed to.
Yeah.
And so I think from that angle, that plays a breakout for me to where people are going to be pleasantly surprised.
The other thing I'll push back on, because this is just kind of fun, not to agree on everything, but is you talked about the price for Miles Sanders. I mean, that according to Fantasy Pros ADP, Joe Mixon is being drafted 11th overall. Miles Sanders is being drafted 22nd overall. So you're talking about a first round pick as opposed to a second round pick. And for me, I would much rather have Miles Sanders in the second than Joe Mixon in the first.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that because usually it goes against my normal thought process of like, hey, don't draft someone at their peak. Don't draft somebody at their ceiling. Get them before them. Like you're saying with Miles Sanders, like get them before they're the guy.
Yeah.
And especially if you're in a keeper league, dynasty league, anything like that, to where you can capitalize off of that for, the future. So it goes against my normal thought process. But if you're in a redraft league and you get Michael Thomas with your first pick and all the running backs are going off the board, don't feel bad about taking Joe Mixon. I think that I think he's being mentally undervalued by people, like just how he's being viewed.
You're saying if you grab Michael Thomas with your first pick, don't feel bad about taking Joe Mixon as your first running back?
Yeah.
I just don't even see that being an opportunity because right now, according to ADP, with Joe Mixon going in the 11th, not unless
now you're forgetting one big thing to ADP right now.
What's that?
And it's primarily that the people listening to this podcast in June and other podcasts in June, and the people that are following all this stuff and doing mock drafts right now are fantasy nerds like us that follow everything.
Yeah.
Once we get closer to the season, you're going to see that ADP of Joe Mixon, the people who don't understand football as well, and you're going to see him drop. And in drafts, he's going to drop. And it's going to be mid to late second for Joe Mixon. And so if you take that high-end wide receiver in the first round, don't feel bad about taking Joe Mixon in the second round. I don't. Once we get past this group of course, super intelligent fantasy listeners and people that are involved in it. I mean, yeah, come on. The people who are so far into fantasy football that they're doing this in June before the offseason programs really even started. They're wise enough to understand that, Joe Mixon and guys like this are good players. And then once you get into the average Joe going into drafts and doing these mocks, that's going to start to bleed down a little bit because they're like, Joe Mixon, Cincinnati,
Yeah.
And I think that's going to fall off.
Okay, I can see that. And I'm definitely on board with if that happens and Mixon falls, as the hype of Miles Sanders rises, and you get the guys who've had Joe Mixon on their team in the past and having those bad feelings about what he's done, to their fantasy teams. He could start to that. They're like, I'm not taking him, and he starts to fall. I definitely agree. With your love of Joe Mixon, let's just say you have the 9th or 10th pick in a draft, and it gets up to you, and obviously the top running backs are gone. So you're sitting there looking at Joe Mixon, Tyreek Hill. Who are you taking at that spot? Maybe there's DeAndre Hopkins is out there, maybe Devontae Adams. You're looking at one of these high-end wide receivers who could, have a great season, and then Joe Mixon is sitting there because there's not many running backs left. Who are you taking?
I'm assuming we're doing PPR, full point, or half point, or even something like that.
Yeah,
I think it depends on your draft strategy. You always want to stay water in a draft, but I think when you should have a plan. If my plan is I want running backs, then I'm taking Mixon. If my plan is 0 RB, then I'm loading up on wide receivers because I can get Tyreek Hill, and then on the comeback, get another one of those guys. Or I could take Devontae Adams and get another one of those guys on the comeback. And then I'm getting into, all right, I'm, because I got this later pick and a snake, I'm going to go 0 RB, and I'm going to take wide receivers, and then I'll worry about running back later in the draft. So I think it depends on what your plan is. If I'm going for a balanced roster in that point, in that position, I'm going to take Mixon and then take the running back, or take the wide receiver that comes back to me, and have a balanced approach. Okay. So I think it just depends on your strategy. But if you're asking me point blank, do I like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and guys like that more than Joe Mixon? I would say it's pretty even. I really like Tyreek Hill. I really like Devontae Adams. And if you're in a PPR league, it's hard to pass on those guys over a Mixon.
You're taking Michael Thomas over Mixon, though?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I am. So it's Michael Thomas.
Yeah, that's about where the line is for you, it seems like. Michael Thomas, you would take the number one overall, or see what seems to be the number one overall receiver over Mixon. But once you start mixing in Hopkins, Adams, Julio, Tyreek, you're probably in most cases going to take Mixon first, and then just catch one of those on the because there's a lot more really good wide receivers than there are running backs, and I would rather grab a guy that I think is going to get me receiving out of the backfield and rushing and touchdowns, and then just go to one of the. Wide receivers so much more plentiful this year. Even though a lot of those guys are the same, like we talked about, I think running backs just so hard to find. All right. Well, good case, good point. How are you on time? Do you have a hard out here soon?
I could probably do probably about 10, roughly 10 more minutes.
That's all we need. I have a question. So that kind of wraps up we do want to give out our also rans, our honorable mentions real quick, and then I have a question for you. So I'll just throw mine out real quick. I also had, like I mentioned, Kyler Murray on that list. I mentioned he could be a breakout when talking about Christian Kirk. I think there is a chance that he could become the number one quarterback if Mahomes has a down year, and let's just say, Lamar does what Lamar does, but just at not a high rate. I think Kyler Murray's got a really good chance to break out. I like Josh Jacobs. I wish they would throw him the ball more, and if they do that, I really like him in that case. And then I also had Hollywood Brown on there. Who do you got?
Let me see. Looking at it, I really like David Montgomery. Talked about that. Mm-hmm. Darius Slayton. God bless Darius Slayton, who cost me a championship last year by getting hurt in the first quarter. Chase Edmonds, because do you really trust Kenyon Drake? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Are you really going to spend that draft capital on Kenyon Drake? I'm not.
Yeah.
So Chase Edmonds, Damian Harris or Rex Burkhead. I don't. It's Bill Belichick. He's going to figure it out. They're going to run the ball.
I love Damian Harris, especially in a 0 RB scenario. Yeah, love that.
Laviska Shenault.
Say that again?
This guy. Laviska Shenault. This is more of a sleeper.
Okay.
I loved this guy at Colorado, and he is a dynamic playmaker, kind of a Deebo Samuel sort of guy, bigger guy than you think, 6'1", 220.
I don't even know who this guy plays for. Who?
The Jacksonville Jaguars.
He's a rookie?
Yep, rookie out of Colorado. So just someone to keep an eye on. I just really like him. He's a talented guy. Keyshawn Vaughn, just because Ronald Jones is a walking dumpster fire, and I just don't think he's going to be the guy there. And, it's just a lot of these running backs would be like, oh, that's the guy. I'm like, have you watched him run the ball? Seriously, watch him run the ball. Like any of these guys. At least Kenyon Drake's got some burst to him. But, it's just it's like watching a trash can roll down the street. I just wouldn't do it. J.K. Dobbins, if he ever gets an opportunity in Baltimore, he's going to do something with it. Just super talented guy. Just a big burst guy. And then Chase Claypool with Pittsburgh, coming out of Notre Dame, rookie wide receiver, who I'm usually not big on rookie wide receivers, but we know Pittsburgh's ability to draft wide receivers and how well they do with it. And I think he's a big-bodied red zone sort of guy who I think is going to get his chance. He'll at least get his chance in Pittsburgh to produce something. And then outside of that, Joe Burrow. I think if you're looking for a quarterback, I think Joe Burrow's with his legs, obviously running is going to get you a lot of running quarterbacks. It's like a cheat code. And I think with that offensive line, he might be running quite a bit for his life at times. So I think Joe Burrow can have a similar season to maybe Kyler Murray last year, where it wasn't like you were overly impressed, but the stats were there.
All right. Well, there's our breakouts. We didn't cross over one time.
Not one time. Crazy, right? I thought we would have had at least one or two.
I thought we might also.
Can we talk real quick? Just one sidebar.
Yeah.
Your intro music that you're using now for the pod, it's like a Jay Dilla sort of vibe to it, and I really like it. I enjoy it. Like I'm bobbing my head when it pops up. Jay Dilla was with Slum Village. He's a great producer that's passed away, but is like kind of the godfather of chilled out hip hop and did a lot of stuff with Tribe Called Quest and different people. Yeah. And so every time it comes on, I want to go listen to Jay Dilla beats and different things that he's produced. So the one person that'll listen to it, it's like, oh my God, this gray bearded old guy actually knows who Jay Dilla is. But I wanted to mention that real quick because I like the intro music. I like it. It's nice. Good vibes. I like it.
Yeah, I feel like it was searching for some things and came across it, and I thought it felt good. I needed to get away from, it's a new era, middle of COVID era, but we took our break when NBA stopped and didn't do podcasts for a while, and I was like, we need something fresh. So thanks. I enjoy the intro music as well. I appreciate that.
Excellent.
Okay, so the question that I wanted to
forgot about this.
Was when we were talking about Joe Mixon and we were talking about draft strategy, like, and you don't have to worry because you and I play, we're adversaries in our home league, and we play. Oh, I think he might have lost. Oh, did someone come to his door, or did his headphones go out? I think it was his headphones because I couldn't hear him. I only heard him. I only saw him hold up the finger. So, yeah. What we're going to be talking about here is, Mike and I have been in a home league for years. We're talking close to over 15 years, I think. And we played each other multiple times in the championship game. And this is a weird thing because we've never done, preseason fantasy talk because we don't want to give away strategies to each other. We really want to come into the draft not knowing, not giving anything away.
I was going to come up with a really good excuse, like one of the kids was crying or something like that.
Yeah.
But no, I just had 6 cups of coffee and I was about to burst because I had to pee so bad.
Okay, gotcha.
I have old man bladder,
Yeah.
I can't, it's just all that coffee got through me. I was about to die. So I couldn't concentrate on your question.
Understandable.
I had to pee so bad. So my apologies.
No worries.
To the listeners out there for that 45 second or minute delay or whatever that took. So what was your question? My apologies.
No worries. I was filling the listeners in on the fact that, we've been in a home league together for over 15 years. And that this is the first time really, that we really we've talked about fantasy together before the season. Cause usually we're really trying to protect, who we like, and we're putting up walls. We don't want to give any of that stuff away. But we operate in and at this point, you know, we're both looking at wanting to do fantasy content, and we're confident enough in our abilities to draft a good team, even though we give out, you know, information. But we participate in an auction league, so that's very different than a snake. So most people still do snake. I would encourage people to switch to auction because it's a better format. But in a snake draft, I mean, in a draft regardless, but specifically snakes, the big thing this year that everyone is touting is going heavy on running back early because there is a lack of running back. So what I'm curious, if you had to give a person who is new at fantasy advice, what would the strategy be this year? Are you following that suit? Are you going to zig when others are zagging and do like a 0 RB? Are you going to try to go more balanced? What's your strategy this year?
Well, I think number one, you should do auction because it's more fun. And it gives you an equal opportunity to get the players you want. If you do a snake draft, you got to deal with whatever cards you're dealt, you know, whatever your random draft position is. You know, it's just going to dictate what your strategy is. And I never liked snake that much because whoever gets the first pick gets rewarded for no reason. Like, hey, randomly you get Christian McCaffrey. And I always hated that.
You win the lottery, basically.
Yeah, and you did nothing to deserve it besides be in the league. And I never liked that aspect of it. And you know, really in our league, when we first started out, obviously we were snake like everybody else. And you know, after a few years, we decided to make the switch to auction, and it was the best thing I think we ever did. And it really gives everybody an equal opportunity to get the same players, or get the players they want. It's not you lucked out and got the first pick, which you can make a case in snake drafts. If you get the first pick, it's tough because, you know, you don't pick again for however many picks, but then you're picking back to back and you're picking two players at a time typically. So, you know, there's a lot of advantages in a snake draft that you get inherently for no reason besides luck. And for me, fantasy football, you want to take as much luck out of the equation as possible. So if you're at an auction, you know, for me, typically in the past, I've done both. I've done 0 RB, and I won a championship in a 0 RB. That was the year I took Devonta Freeman, I think, like in the 5th or 6th round, something like that. And then I've also been, as you know, a very RB heavy person. Like I have Christian McCaffrey right now, and I've had Zeke Elliott the past few years, and I always, you know, I'm a running back centric person.
Todd Gurley in his heyday.
Todd Gurley, yeah. Arian Foster. Like I've banked off of these running backs.
You are the running back whisperer.
I'm the running back whisperer. So I will always say, because there's less great ones to get, and you can find wide receivers that are serviceable, especially if you're in a PPR league, half point or full point, that you should tend to want to get the great running backs and then work from that point. But really, it just depends what kind of draft you have, where you're drafting from. Because if you're in a snake and you get the 7th or 8th pick, you're not getting that guy. And so you have to adjust your strategy and say, I'm going to take the best wide receiver and, you know, the 2 best wide receivers, and then I'm going to wait at running, or, you know, wait on my running back and try to find those breakouts and those diamonds in the rough. So really, it just depends on, you know, the style of your league, the draft, and different things that's going to dictate what your process is and what your strategy is going to be. But typically, I would suggest to get that running back if you're able to, get that top end guy if you're able to, that Saquon Barkley, McCaffrey, Zeke Elliott sort of guy.
Yeah, and assuming you're not doing an auction and you have less options, I mean, you really need to come up with a strategy earlier. It's a little easier to kind of be fluid in an auction, because if someone outbids you, you know, you have your second guy that you're going after, and you don't have to necessarily bend to the snake draft. But so you're saying that the trend this year, which is get 2 running backs with your first 2 picks almost regardless, is the strategy that you would go with more times than not?
More times than not, yes, but I also think there is, in a certain respect, it is good to zig when everybody's zagging, or zag when everybody's zigging, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Where if everybody's going to be trying to get running backs, that just opens up more opportunity for you to get those wide receivers. And if you're in a PPR league, those high-end wide receivers, your Michael Thomases and guys of that ilk are, just definitely huge assets to get a hold of. And, through the wire, through other means, there's always running backs who pop up over the course of the year that can fill that void for you. So if you miss out on Zeke or Saquon or McCaffrey in an auction draft or in a snake, don't fret. Like, just pivot, have your strategy and then be able to pivot if you need to. And, go for those wide receivers and then try to find your gems at running back. And then through the season, just do your due diligence and do your work to get the right guys on the wire, because we all know that's going to happen. There's going to be guys that come off the wire that end up having great years. Kenyon Drake, what he did down the stretch last year. You could point to any year, and there's always a handful of running backs that come off the wire that end up just crushing it. So, there's nothing wrong if you miss out on those running backs, and I don't think people should, force something that isn't there and then freak out because they weren't able to get those guys.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It is the strategy that everyone's kind of pushing, and this year more than any, almost, that you're just hearing it more and more. People say wide receivers so deep this year, so there's no need to really reach for a guy. Unless you're in a specific position, and a lot of, and especially if you're picking towards the end of the first round, in a situation like that where there's not those all the McCaffreys, the Saquons, the Kamaras, the Dalvin Cooks if he plays, all these guys are gone, and you are deciding between Joe Mixon and Miles Sanders whether you want them to anchor your running back core. So I just think it's really prevalent that a lot of people are kind of touting this. A lot of people are saying wide receivers deep, you can get, and it's true. It is true. So if you can get two running backs early that you are confident in and believe in, I also think that is the way to go. But, be fluid and be able to change your draft strategy. I just think that's an interesting thing this year. And I'm kind of asking everybody I talk about fantasy with what their strategy would be. And even though you shouldn't have a concrete strategy, you should be able to move away from it if certain things happen. But I'm just curious where everyone's head is. So, all right, Mike. Well, I think that does it. It's been a long podcast, but
it always is with us. This is what we do. So look, it's June. We're craving football. We're craving football content. So we're just giving more to the people and something more they can listen to get them through that drive home or drive to work or during their work day. I think, this is our thing. This is what we do. We always plan on an hour and it always ends up being more, which is great.
Yeah, you got to love it. More content for you all. So thanks for listening. As always, thanks for downloading and clicking, sharing, subscribing, all that good stuff. Continue to do that. Tell your friends about the Daily Fantasy Sweat. And Mike, we look forward to having you back on very soon.
Yeah, appreciate being on. Thank you all. Everybody stay safe and love and help one another.
All right. Thanks, Mike.